Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our third session of the Guarini School of Business Summer Speaker Series. I truly thank all of our faculty members who volunteered their time to prepare and present these sessions. And I think it's great to be able to feature some of our finest and most dedicated professors who bring unique perspectives to such timely topics. I also wanted to let everyone know that we're adding 5 additional sessions. This is in addition to the ones that are listed on the initial flyer that's been sent out. We're working on updating that flyer and we'll be sending out information on the new sessions very soon. Today's topic is what COVID-19 revealed about the Obama-Trump economy and its ramifications for the future of US and global political economy, which Dr. Rafferty will wrap up in a brief 30-minute lecture, but I'm sure we could talk about this for days and days. Dr. Rafferty is one of our great professors in the Department of Economics and Finance, and he's also the founding director of our MS in Finance program, newly launched in fall 2019. Dr. Rafferty completed his undergraduate studies at Drew University and his PhD at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, the leading institution for modern money theory. His research involves issues pertaining to sustainable financial macroeconomic development, particularly in Latin America, and he has numerous peer-reviewed publications in the field. Dr. Rafferty's quote on his faculty page on the St. Peter's website is, "I believe the best academic results occur from having interactive classroom discussion and the Socratic method. And while Zoom is not exactly the same as us all being together on campus, it's our new normal for now. So thank you, Devin, for adapting." I'd like to thank all of our alumni for joining us today, our St. Peter's students, and our faculty members for joining us. And I'd just like to remind everybody to please keep your microphones on mute until the open Q&A towards the second half of the session. So again, thank you, Dr. Rafferty. And I'm going to hand it over to you, and I'm going to put myself on mute as well.
Okay. Shanez just logged in, so hi to Shanez as well. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for having interest in this. I think this is probably the biggest event in this country since at least the Great Depression, if not, bigger. So there's a lot of ground to cover. Obviously, we could talk about this for days and days, but I'm going to try to summarize my viewpoint, and it's my viewpoint, it's subjective, right, in roughly 30 minutes, and then hopefully we have some Q&A. Okay, first off, there's going to be political implications, okay? I'm an economist, but there's going to be political implications. Originally, the discipline was called political economy. David Ricardo's book was called Principles of Political Economy. Leon Ross, Principles of Political Economy. It was only became economics with, I believe, Alfred Marshall. Okay. So again, the normative aspects of economics usually are marginalized in favor of simply positive economics. But that's not something that Adam Smith or David Ricardo actually viewed. If you read the Theory of Moral Sentiments by Adam Smith or lectures on jurisprudence, there's normative implications. That's Adam Smith, okay? So I wanted to start off coming to you from my luxurious floor of my bedroom, because that's where we're at these days, by laying down some facts that we probably all know about COVID, coronavirus, but this is going to be what informs my economic analysis. Okay? We know that the virus has a 2-week incubation period with no symptoms, that can happen. Contagious infected people can be asymptomatic. The hardest hit people are those with underlying respiratory and circulatory conditions. Wearing masks, national lockdowns, widespread testing, aggressive contact tracing helps lower the transmission rate and the number of cases, just like in South Korea and in New Zealand. If you're unsure, and the one that really scares me, I don't know, but we are unsure if it can or has evolved. There were reports out of Beijing that there was a different strand. I haven't followed up on it. I haven't had time. I've been doing daddy daycare. But my point is, it has the potential to create widespread social uncertainty. That much we know. Okay? In terms of what we know does combat the virus and what doesn't combat the virus, the US has done nothing of this except large testing. It's not widespread in the sense that we have to have symptoms, okay? You have, in order to get tested, it's just large testing from, we have a large number of cases, okay? If you have strep throat and you go through strep throat and don't get tested for it, it doesn't mean that you don't have strep throat, okay? I don't know how this is becoming political. Okay, that explains where our curves, if you look at the curves, it's growing exponentially 4.5 months after our first cases. There's been talk of, is this the second wave? No, Fauci is very clear that this is still the first wave. It's just making its way into more rural areas. New York was the epicenter, now it's not. We're headed towards 100,000 cases a day, an unimaginable death toll. I can't believe I have to say this, but every day I ponder if we're gonna get to 1 million. I believe my personal view, this is personal, I believe we will continue to see severe regional outbreaks, and if and when the Northeast has a true second wave coming in the fall and the winter, there will be a full-fledged national outbreak worse than now. And I can already assure you, I live in Monmouth County, I live in a little town called Leonardo, it's a part of Middletown. People already do not take distancing seriously, masks seriously. They don't take this virus seriously. If you drive down Main Street in the Atlantic Highlands, you see people out at, it's the outdoor bars, I get it. They're 2 feet away. And now they've been cooped up, so they have to get out, right? Okay, a vaccine would maybe solve this, but did the virus evolve? Because then you have to develop another vaccine and another vaccine. My point is that it leads to massive uncertainty. Let's talk about the economy. Weekly unemployment claims are still in the millions. Today it came out, I believe it was 1.3 million. That's 17 straight weeks of over 1 million unemployment claims, okay? And it wasn't just 1 million, we had 5 million, right? We had 6 or 7, I think. Unemployment was at 3.5% in February, 4.4% in March, 14.7% in April, 13.3% in May, 11.1% in June. I know there's optimism that the unemployment rate is going down. Those are bartenders and hairdressers going back to work in Georgia. The stock market, which I would like to point out is not the economy. In fact, the stock market is actually just a secondary market. Crashed, but since then the Dow almost recovered. The S&P is higher, the NASDAQ is even higher. So in the midst of millions of unemployment claims, crashing consumption, a production shortage, a demand shock, the stock market is at all-time highs. So maybe the efficient markets theory is dead wrong, which was also shown in 2008. And we already know that it has massive theoretical issues. For those who know what the efficient markets theory is, I'm just throwing that out there, right? But this is just revealing the curtain, right? The flaws behind the curtain, okay? Fed funds rate is at 0 to 0.25%, set up all sorts of swap lines. The 10-year treasury yield is near 0.5%, lowest on record across the board for all treasury yields. Bond indices featuring record low yields as well. Generally, we had contango, for those who know what contango is, in commodity markets, notably oil, which is typically not a good sign, okay? Initially, with the shutdown, with the stay-at-home orders, we had a supply shock that could actually have briefly caused inflation, right? If supply drops and demand stays high, you could theoretically get inflation. But subsequently, with the negative demand shocks, just a negative consumption multiplier every single week. It's likely to be deflation. Honestly, I think it's too tough to tell right now. I do, I just don't know. Right? The CARES Act, increased spending by $2 trillion. I'm gonna focus on this later on in my talk. That was phase 3 after phase 1's $8 billion for virus research and phase 2's $104 billion for paid sick leave. The CARES itself was $454 for corporate loans, $349 billion for small business loans, which reports highlighted did not actually go to small businesses. 301 billion to household payments, 250 to unemployment insurance, 150 billion in state aid. Amidst all of these unprecedented changes, which I am 36 years old, and none of this has happened remotely in my lifetime, or even since World War II. All of these governmental efforts to combat the negative economic effects. Consumer confidence is still down 24% from February. And incidentally, China grew 3.2% in Q2. Let's talk about prior to the pandemic. The narrative before the pandemic was that the US economy was the best it had ever been. GDP growth averaged 2.23%. We had the longest expansion ever on record. Broad-based, the gains were broad-based in the sense that African American and Latino unemployment rates were also very low. The Fed was engaging in counter-cyclical monetary policy by raising rates. They had actually made it up to 2.5%. Bond yields were up. Stock market was at all-time highs. Little inflation. We were starting to see wage increases. We were also running annual trillion-dollar deficits. Okay? And we still had increasing inequality, okay? Both of income and wealth and socioeconomic opportunity. Oh, it's 12:15 already. I got to get moving. Sorry. Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the signature Trump legislation. Partnerships and corporations received roughly 1.5 trillion in tax cuts. It was supposed to increase investment through supply-side economics, but since supply-side economics has huge theoretical issues, this did not happen. Subsequent research confirmed that the freed up funds predominantly went to stock buybacks rather than research and development or increased capital formation. And the effects of it petered out within 18 months. Okay. The Obama-Trump economy. Okay. There is a statistical test called a two-way ANOVA. ANOVA stands for analysis of variance. We're not going to start doing math, don't worry. Okay. But it's a two-way ANOVA with replication. And that test can be used to compare two different economic eras with multiple economic categories. I teach it in my EC 300 class to the students. And what we do is we compare economic variables from the Trump economy and economic variables from the Obama economy, okay? If you look at productivity growth, capital formation, other stuff, and this isn't across the board, but it's not strictly true for each economic aggregate data series, but if you run multiple two-way ANOVAs with many different data series, with Trump and Obama, Trump's economy is largely just a continuation of Obama's, okay? So we do this in EC 300 using the Bloomberg in the Deneen G08 lab. Hopefully we'll get back to it one day. So after the great financial crisis was over and the expansion started, Obama's GDP growth averaged 2.25% from 2010 to 2016. Trump's has been 2.23. Largely holds true as well for unemployment, labor force participation, inflation, non-farm payrolls, employment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The exception to this, oddly enough, the one real significant difference between Obama and Trump is the deficit to GDP ratio. During Obama's presidency, the deficit to GDP ratio lowered every year from 2009 till he left office, while Trump has consistently raised it. I don't know why we think that spending $1.1 trillion a year over 3 years to lower the unemployment rate, a cumulative 2.1%, has somehow created the greatest economy the world has ever seen. Underneath the surface of this Obama-Trump economy, though, during Barack Obama's presidency, and this continued with Donald Trump, 94% of all of the jobs that were created were in retail or food and service industry. Think about that. Because now when we have to close the malls and the bars, that's all the jobs we've been creating. If I have the 94%, it's up there. It's really, really up there. Okay, so underneath the surface of this wonderful economy is that in general, we're living in a type of capitalism called money manager capitalism. And usually in that, financial crises precede economic crisis. Prior to the pandemic, there was a lot of back-channel talk about increasing financial market concern on collateralized debt obligations tied to risky corporate debt, asset-backed securities, and an overvalued equity market. Okay? Just an overvalued stock market. Okay? So what did COVID reveal? Highlighted that some US corporations were highly over-leveraged and in speculative financial profiles instead of hedge. And there's no way to avoid this. When we had the national lockdown, when the pandemic started, if you cannot go a few days or a week without revenue before bankruptcy, your company is not financially healthy. And incidentally, the last 40 years, United States corporations have had record profits every single year. Where did it go? Implies the CEOs and the CFOs have not been responsibly running their companies. At least some of them. I'm not blanket statementing anything, okay? I'm saying some of them. That highlights that the structure of American pay compensation is not reflective of workers' relative productivity. It also means that the job creators are the middle-class consumers, just as John Maynard Keynes, the founder of macroeconomics, said, not the 1% who the job creators, right? All they do is respond to demand for their product. And I'll return to this later with a discussion on Keynes. Okay? 3, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act did not have the stated effect of incentivizing corporations to research and development invest, bolster wages, or provide sufficient funding to be competitive. It served as another empirical example that supply-side economics is a failure. See Art Laffer about that. Art Laffer is the father of supply. Well, it goes back before Art Laffer, but he's the person that a lot of people know who like popularized supply-side economics. Okay. 4, the initial supply shock highlighted that the unequal pay scale is not representative of an economic contribution. If wages are stable while profits are rising, yet when the supply shock happened and labor was unavailable, GDP fell off a cliff. So it increasingly appears that labor is a much bigger source of value than is constantly attributed to it. And it might not be the CEOs, workers might be the source of value. 5, the US healthcare system is still broken. And that's not taking the pandemic into account, okay? What that highlights is we still have unequal access to care. We still have issues, right? People are not, initially at least, people were not going to get tested because they were worried they were going to get a gigantic bill. And in fact, I had my youngest son tested for it, and because we couldn't figure out something going on with his ear, right? The way it works is I got a $3,000 bill from the testing company, and then the healthcare company sent me $3,000 I had to forward on. How is this making, why? Okay. 6, and this is just me, okay? Conservatism is dead. There's just no way to go about it, okay? I don't know how it can be defended. What I mean by this is the economics behind conservatism have had major issues since the Cambridge Capital controversies of 1956 to 1960. Piero Sraffa just, it was over, okay? We don't have to talk about the nitty-gritty, boring econ here. If you take conservatism as the social philosophy, it's the idea that everyone subjectively following their own free will, common sense, freedom produces an optimal social outcome, a harmonious, society. Well, if we do that right now, some people wear masks, some people don't wear masks, some people distance, some people don't, that's not going to produce an optimal outcome. We know that. It's science. So I don't know how it's defensible. Okay? 7, Keynes was right, okay? I'm just going to do a quick Keynes lecture. This is the way I teach it in EC 101. What did Keynes say? He wanted to figure out why the economy has business cycles, okay? He said, could it be consumption? No, people, they tend to not increase consumption a lot and then decrease it. You go to the movies, you go to the restaurant, et cetera, right? But you don't get $1 trillion swings in consumption. said it's investment. Okay? Investment going up and down is what causes the business cycle. Well, what is the biggest scare? What scares investors more than anything? Widespread uncertainty. He said, if you're uncertain, you're going to hold on to cash rather than become illiquid. And right now, I just don't see why there would be any good reason for the CEO of Boeing, or pick the company, throw a dart at a dartboard, other than Amazon, to go investing when half of your labor force might be sent home, hospitalized, etc. And so I think, yes, unemployment is going down, but when the fixed capital formation numbers come out, I think that's what you really got to follow over the next 18 months. Okay? I don't think they're going to be good. In addition, consumption is going down, and consumption has a multiplier. If I want to buy something from Dean Natus, now Dean Natus has more cash, and Dean Natus can go and buy something from Dr. Paige Hungerjuk, who can then go buy something, right? So multiplier, and that works in reverse too. If I stop spending on Leonardo, the pizzeria in Leonardo, right? Well, that means that they don't have income to go out and buy face masks. And that means they can't go and buy banana bread, right? Which apparently everyone's making these days. And so the point is that you have this negative multiplier. Okay. The way Keynes was always taught to me was that spending creates income, which is just a tautology. Income creates sales, because believe me, if I was a billionaire, I'd be spending more. And sales creates jobs. When the cash register goes off, you hire more, you invest more. So therefore, spending creates jobs. Well, that works in reverse too. Okay? So what's the future of US and global political economy? Depends on November. In my estimation, it depends on November. Okay? If Trump wins, the economic problems and the virus will rage. Okay? I think it'll be the end of the US as the world's sole superpower. Our remaining allies will only be made possible via military or financial means. We've become increasingly isolated and see geopolitical power center move to Asia. Okay? We'll be forced to take our directions from China. And path dependence highlights this will continue even after Trump leaves office. So after he had another 4 years, once you start down a road, you can't really come back from it. I'd love to be an astronaut, but I chose the economic route. Okay? If Biden wins, we need to pursue policies that solve the pandemic to decrease uncertainty and increase investment. It's tough to say. I know a lot of people see him as a white knight. His track record, though, is as a neoliberal, which I'm going to get to. And that's another COVID failure revelation. I'll get to that. Lately, Biden's stump speeches on Build Back Better has a commitment to reinvigorating U.S. industrial production and an aggressive climate policy, with $2 trillion of investment going to electrical cars, power plant transformation, fossil fuels, all in his first term so that it can't be phased out. On the economy, I mentioned that Biden historically has been pretty neoliberal. We'll see if that's what he continues to be, or if he sort of slides more to a 1950s Republican, like Eisenhower, who invested in science and technology, infrastructure, labor unions. If he stays neoliberal, then and I'll discuss neoliberalism. Right now, I don't see any V-shaped recovery for the economy. I think it's going to look like an L. Okay? If Biden sort of takes up the policies of a 1950s Republican, we could see a U. That's me. Okay? This talk of a V-shaped recovery is nothing more than reality TV, in my view. Okay? It appears that Joe Biden is moving in the proper direction, in my estimation, to solidify the base, combine the Midwest and Eastern suburbs with young urbans of all races. So, final thing, well, not sort of the final thing. COVID showed that neoliberalism does not work. We know that it's theoretically faulty, but it's empirically and practically faulty as well. What is neoliberalism? Okay, first, it has nothing to do with the way the United States uses the term liberal. Okay, it's free market, deregulated capitalism, free trade, unregulated finance, privatizing of industry. It's the idea, fundamentally, it's the idea that poverty and inequality is the fault of the individual, and that the system automatically generates zero involuntary unemployment. It's the idea that government should be run like a business, not like a government. It privileges efficiency over effectiveness and shareholder value ideology. I don't have time to go through with this. It might come up in the question and answer. Each president since Ronald Reagan has been economically neoliberal, pushing our economy, structurally speaking, to the right. Forget about the budgets, okay? Budgets, fiscal budgets are endogenously determined by the business cycle, okay? When Clinton balanced the budget, it was simply because the economy was booming. And I can get into that too if we want to, okay? This is the 40-year culmination of an era in which health institutes, scientific research and development, education, social and physical infrastructure, truthful news outlets, climate change countermeasures, and the general health system and racial inequality have gone extremely underfunded, while the military industrial complex and private corporations have been overfunded. So I want to give you a story. I can't use the name, but there's, it's called the Henry Hudson running path or some, it's right by where I live. Okay? And I run on it almost every day. And there's a little parking lot with a building there where, you know, it used to be public bathrooms and stuff like that. And for a while it had turned into a food bank. As I ran past it with my son, Connor, there was a car with somebody who got out. And it's a girl that he goes to daycare with. Okay? And she doesn't know where her next meal is coming from, and neither does her parents. And that was what really hit me when I saw that, because that is the culmination of the Reagan Revolution, of moving this country economically to the right. It may sound good as rhetoric, but it has major economic problems, and now it has a huge empirical issue. Okay? So where do we go? Where do we go from here? And I'll wrap this up in 3 minutes, hopefully very quickly. Okay. So where do we go from here? I think the strongest thing that anyone can actually say, just in general, right? If you really want to be intellectually confident, the best thing anyone can say is, I don't know, okay? Because it shows that you're willing to go and learn again. And I'm a social scientist. I'm not a medical infectious disease specialist. Casual observation seems to follow, we got to follow New Zealand and Korea. Okay? I think we need to listen to the people who study it. Go to them and say, what should we do, right? That's what we should be doing, okay? I can say as an economist, the benefit, one thing I can tell you is that the limits to what we can and cannot do in this economy, the limit, we are constrained by real resources. What's a real resource? It's labor, it's timber, it's economic capital, okay? Not financial capital, economic capital, machines, human capital. That's what we are constrained by. I can tell you that the United States government is not financially constrained because the United States government does not spend taxpayer money or borrow from China. Huh? Yes, no, it's true. Okay, it shouldn't be controversial, and it wasn't controversial before Paul Samuelson wrote a textbook called Macroeconomics. Think about it like this. When you see the Patriots playing the Jets, and, oh, Tom Brady's gone now. Oh, thank goodness. Okay, but historically speaking, when Tom Brady and the Jets have been playing, right, and Tom Brady gets the 5th touchdown of the game, do they tax the Jets those points to put it on the scoreboard? No. Do they borrow it from the New York Giants game? No. The scoreboard operator makes the points, and that's how they do it. And the United States government is the sole, only currency issuer in the entire world of US dollars. Okay? So they always have the power to make it. And so when you hear people say, oh, but how will we pay for it? The CARES Act just blatantly showed you, okay? We don't have money to fix the roads. We don't have money for PPE. We don't have this. Oh, $2 trillion? You need it? Okay, we'll do that, okay? If you want to talk more about modern money theory, we can, but that's modern money theory, okay? Treasury spending, the way that works is Treasury spending, the Fed marks up the recipient account and the reserve account whenever the Treasury spends. What they use is a reverse repurchase agreement, Treasury tax and loan accounts, and if you want to talk about that at questions, we can talk about it at questions. Dean Natus, I don't think there's any reason that people should take my word for it. Maybe if you could show 2 videos of 2 Federal Reserve chairmen admitting that this is how it works.
All right, I'm working on it.
Thank you.
Balance sheet. Is that tax money that the Fed is spending?
It's not tax money. The banks have accounts with the Fed, much the same way that you have an account in a commercial bank. So to lend to a bank, we simply use the computer to mark up the size of the account that they have with the Fed. So it's much more akin, although not exactly the same, but it's much more akin to printing money than it is to borrowing.
You've been printing money.
Well, effectively, and we need to do that because our economy is very weak and inflation is very low. When the economy begins to recover, that'll be the time that we need to unwind those programs, raise interest rates, reduce the money supply, make sure that we have
Made the first point.
We printed digitally.
Sorry.
Fair to say you simply flooded the system with money.
Yes, we did. That's another way to think about it. We did.
Where does it come from? Do you just print it?
We printed digitally. So we as a central bank, we have the ability to create money digitally. And we do that by buying treasury bills or bonds or other government guaranteed securities. And that actually increases the money supply. We also print.
Thank you.
Sure.
And so with that, I guess we'll open up for questions for the next 23 minutes or so.
Am I unmuted? Thank you, Dr. Rafferty. Thanks for this food for thought. And I think it's really interesting to compare the situation and our current economy under President Trump to the previous economy under President Obama. I think everybody wants to hear more about when this true economic recovery is coming. I think we all see the role that politics is playing in the process. It's a really interesting time for all of us. We do have a lot of time for questions. I just want to ask everybody to please use the raise hand function. I see Professor Butkus has his hand up, so you'll be first. If you click on the participants tab, which is right under the video screen, you'll be able to access the raise hand function. Oh, a lot of people are putting their hands up now. You could also send your question via the chat feature. So I'm going to pass it to Professor Butkus, followed by Bill Armbruster.
Thanks, Mary Kate. And Devin, well done. You covered a tremendous amount of ground and touched on an enormous amount of topics. And I think you've given us a lot to think about, and you've probably given some people a lot to be mad at. So, but that notwithstanding, as an adherent to MMT, I think I know how you're going to respond to this question, but I'm going to ask it nevertheless, because I asked it of our guest last week. I didn't really agree with his answer, but the $3 trillion that has been printed, that was used to fund the CARES and recovery and paycheck protection and all the rest. And then there's another $1.5 trillion. we're approaching, the combination of those are approaching 15, 18% of GDP. There's lots of evidence historically that when governments print money far in excess of the capacity of the economy to produce real things, it leads to inflation. And yet, many banks, many corporations don't seem to fear it. What's your thought on that?
So the two that come up a lot as evidence is Weimar Germany and Zimbabwe. And I don't think we can compare the United States to that. There's multi levels of answers to this. I'm not.
Yeah, I would add 1980s Argentina in there, and probably 1970s Brazil in there as well. But anyway, go ahead. The
Okay.
two biggies.
So the idea that printing money causes inflation is really from the neoclassical school of economics, which was popularized by Milton Friedman most notably. And in that, I got a little whiteboard here. I didn't know if I was going to need it. In that, can you see that? No, you can't see that. Sorry.
Yeah, we could see it.
Black. I'll go get a black marker. Sorry.
Keeping us in suspense.
Phil, you're on deck after Bill.
Oh, no problem.
Sorry. Okay. Okay. So this is NV equals PY. Can you see that? Yeah.
Yes.
So what the neoclassical school and Friedman did is they make the money supply, and this is a tautology. It's that the money supply times the velocity, that's how quickly money is turned over, is equal to the price level, the aggregate price level, times income, okay? Or output, income and output. And what Friedman and the neoclassicals do is assume velocity is constant, that we're at full employment, and that any changes in the money supply go directly to the price level. But because it's assumed that you're at full employment and velocity is constant, we're not at full employment, and velocity of money, I would argue, is rarely constant. So I don't put a lot of, stock into Friedman and monetarism. Inflation is a real issue, though. Just because I belong to MMT does not mean that I don't worry about it. Right now, I think, again, I touched on it a little bit. I think it's more likely that we'll have deflation because we had the initial supply shock, and then we're going to have this unending demand shock, I guess. But yes, once an economy gets to full employment, you absolutely can have inflation. Okay. Just because MMT says you can drive the Ferrari 300 miles an hour, it doesn't mean you should drive the Ferrari 300 miles an hour. But one way of staving off an inflation worry would be to implement an employer of last resort policy. Okay. Basically, we pay people to stay at home right now, and I'm talking non-pandemic aside, right? Job guarantee. Basically, we pay people to stay home rather than do stuff, right? Why don't we just take the unemployment offices and turn them into employment offices? Okay? I know people always say, well, what will we have them do? Well, let's use our imagination, right? My father is elderly, probably shouldn't be driving, stuff like that. Help someone take care of him, right? Stuff like that. But anyway, a little bit of a rambling answer. I'm not worried about inflation, though. I realize that we are creating a lot of liquidity, but I think we're very far away from full employment.
Okay, I'm next. Devin, very comprehensive overview. One subject you did not touch on, however, was the impact of COVID-19 on state and local governments. Here in New Jersey, as you've probably seen, Governor Murphy announced plans to borrow close to $10 billion in order to avoid draconian cuts. And state and local governments, as you well know, cannot print money, unlike the federal government. So what do you see as the impact on them over time? Are they going to be facing doomsday scenarios?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, unless you have transfers, you know, it's just, you're either going to see massive increases in borrowing and hope that the bond issues get floated at the, you know, at the
Relatively low interest rates. Yeah.
Yeah. Or you're going to see, and most of us, I assume, are in New Jersey, so I should say this lightly, the property tax increase. Or you'll see, if there's a vaccine and if children go back to school and this sort of thing, you'll see the structural decay of a school system, because that's, you know, taxes go to the school system more or less. So to answer your question, Bill, yes, I mean, it wouldn't be good.
Thanks. Thanks, Bill.
Yeah.
We have Phil and then Samar.
All right. Thanks, Dean Natus. Dr. Rafferty, great presentation. Definitely put a lot in perspective that I had questions about, you know, in the economy. And, you know, I dropped this comment in the chat, but I guess I saw a report today that said 1.3 million people filed for unemployment last week for the first time. So for first time unemployment. So as that trend continues, can you talk about how that affects the economy? Because I know you touched upon how, you know, if you don't have cash, you're not buying things, the money doesn't circulate. So can you touch on the effects of the continuing filing for unemployment that has on the economy?
Sure. It will not be good. It is a negative demand shock. At least they're still getting unemployment compensation, so there's still some consumption going on, but it's the reverse multiplier. So let me hit this in two different ways. The first relates to prices. So when I was talking with Professor Butkus, I don't know if we're going to have inflation or deflation, because we did have a supply shock. We told everyone just stay at home and do nothing, right? So we weren't making anything other than, you know, food and face masks. So if supply went down, but if demand, if the spending stayed there, you could have actually had some inflation, right? But now you're seeing just so many people, millions of people unemployed. I suspect that what's going to happen in the coming months is twofold. First, you're going to have reduced consumption. And so if you have the reduced consumption, that's still, you know, less spending, less income, less sales, less jobs, right? And then secondly, once CEOs, CFOs, whomever, right, the people who are going to do the investing, once you see reduced consumption, well, why are you going to invest? A, if your labor force is all going to get sent home, and then B, if there's less of a demand for your product, right? And so I think you have this slow march of consumption, but eventually you're going to have this cliff of investment.
Gotcha.
I don't blame me.
Yeah, of course. Thanks.
But yeah, I mean, it's the hard thing to say is we are in such an unprecedented time. There is no precedence for studying this, right? You're all going off of your gut, and you could compare it to the Great Depression, but the Great Depression didn't also have a disease ravaging a country. So, yeah.
Gotcha. Thanks, Dr. Rafferty.
Yeah.
Thank you. Dr. Issa is next, and then Charlie. And I know we have quite a few finance masters and undergrad students on the call. So if you have questions, feel free to ask as well.
Hi, everyone. Yes, I'm here. Thanks, Devin. It was really a great presentation. And as everyone said, you touched base on a lot of topics. I just have a very quick question. So you mentioned the recovery, right? And you said it could be a V, it could be L, no one knows. What would you say? I personally think it will be a minimum of a W. We're going to go down the hill even further eventually. So I would replace the person. So what would you say about that? And what do you think about the economy? Will it ever return to the way it was? We had a really, like, we had an, I think we had an economy full of problems to start with, a global economy full of problems. And that's why we reached a point where when we had a pandemic, we had a crisis. So we were in a bad place to start with, right? So do you agree with that? And what do you think? Will we ever return to where we were? And then my third question is, oh, they ended up being 3 questions, but sorry. And the third one is, what would you say the recovery, how would you compare what's happening in the global economy, developed versus emerging markets? What's happening, like the reaction of what's going on in the developed and the emerging market, and how will the recovery be different in both ways? Thank you.
Okay. Yes. No. Thank you. Thank you for the compliment. So a W. Yeah, you could maybe, I said an L, right? Or maybe a U, but you could, whatever, I don't have to write it down. You'll have like a big U and then with W's in between, I would think, right? I don't know if you'll have a big pronounced up and then down and up again, right? It's kind of like that. So I could see that. Will the economy be the same? I hope not. We had major problems in the Trump-Obama economy. We did. We had skyrocketing unemployment. We were spending $1 trillion a year to lower the interest rate 1.7% or whatever it was, right? You could just look up from January 2017 until February of now, how far the unemployment rate went down. We weren't really seeing wage increases. You know, I mean, it wasn't that great. We had stock market was at an all-time high though, so things had to have been going great. It wasn't that great of an economy. I think, look, forget about Joe Biden aside, okay? I think the slogan is at least correct. Build back better, right? It doesn't have to be Joe Biden. I'm just saying we should really rebuild this economy in a way that rewards the source of value in a proportional way to productivity and tackle the climate crisis, right? I mean, when we come out, the crazy thing going on in all of this is we have a pandemic, a bad economy, social unrest. I didn't really touch on that at all. But if you know, wave a magic wand, well, tomorrow we still have a climate problem, right? I mean, the data that comes out on the climate, I don't know if people, you know, read it, pay attention. It's like, we have somewhere between like 10 and 15 years to get this thing under control, or it is no good. Okay? So we need to build back an economy in a productive way. Let's look at what we did from 1945 to 1970. That was the best run the US has ever had, right? How did we do that? And we did it with Democrats and Republican presidents, okay? How do we do it? Massive investment in science and technology. The Marshall Plan, but we're gonna need a Marshall Plan, right? Infrastructure, okay? It doesn't have to be go build roads. We could do super Wi-Fi everywhere, but you know, this is the thinking we need to do. We had regulated interest rates, regulated exchange rates, okay? We don't necessarily have to do that, but I'm just pointing out what we had. We had strong labor protections. Okay. There was no such thing as a collateralized debt obligation with the CDO squared, right? So I think we can not go back, we have to build forward, right? But there are some lessons for what works in our favor. Okay? I mean, everyone was praising Elon Musk for getting a rocket in outer space. Well, John Kennedy, I think it was John Kennedy, right? Kennedy's rolling over saying, I did that 60 years ago. Good job, right? I mean, come on. And I really think we need to have an employer of last resort, because what that does is it acts as a buffer stock. And Samar, you know all about this, so I'm just kind of talking to the rest of the audience. But it acts as a buffer stock. If you were to lose your job, you could take up a job in the job guarantee. You wouldn't have consumption just fall off a cliff. And then as the economy improves, the private sector will hire workers away, okay, for better wages. And so I think that's a much better approach and something we should have. What would they do? Range of different things. I could spend a lot of time on it, but people have questions. Like Charlie was next, I think. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to, I forget who was next. I thought it was Charlie.
Thank you very much, Devin. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Thanks, Samar. Yes, Charlie Ramos is next.
Hi, thanks for having this. This is really interesting. I had two questions that are sort of non-related. And someone touched on the municipalities and the impact, on coffers. I'm in California. You guys are New Jersey, New York, so we're kind of all in the same boat with taxes. Can you talk about, to the extent that the federal government doesn't use any money to help states and municipalities, what impact do you think the eventual raised taxes will have, from an inflationary standpoint? Is one question. Then the other, which is unrelated, if you can talk about employment relative to kind of the new economy, right? The automation and robotics, just general technology and productivity that comes from that. Just your broad opinion on those two areas.
Sure, okay. Let's do automation first. I don't really know if, I don't know about California. I did write a book. It was unpublished because, a long story. But in the data I found there for Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, in all of the counties that voted for Obama and then for Trump, everyone, the story is China and Mexico. But it turns out that output actually has gone up while employment has gone down. How is that possible? It was automation. So it's really just the replacing of workers, right? That's what was going on. It wasn't outsourcing. It was just humans versus machines. With regard to the future of automation, I think it's another good argument in favor of some sort of a job guarantee. Automation can be very good. AKA, like when we go to the supermarket, right? There used to be someone who looked at the shelves, and now you scan it and, more soup comes to the store. But in some regards, it can be very dangerous. And when I say we not retrain workers, because that's always the focus, we need to make sure that there's targeted spending in the areas that we want the workers to go into. Okay? What I mean by that is you can be the most productive auto mechanic. If cars don't break down, there's no demand for it, you don't have a job, right? So we will need some sort of retraining for workers who are displaced by automation, but at the same time, we need to make sure that what they get retrained into exists, right? Now, automation goes on a lot in manufacturing, and I know that the current president and even Mr. Biden, say we're going to have a resurgence of manufacturing. The manufacturing jobs are gone, man. Like they're gone. What we need to do is evolve into a high wage service economy. That's the next thing. And I don't really want to go through it right now, but if you want to look it up, Charlie, there's a guy named Simon Kuznets, Kuznet, and he has something called the Kuznets curve. And what it is it shows how economies have income inequality as they transition from agricultural into industry. And now it used to be a curve, but now it's sort of resembling an S. And so you'll see that. I think we need to pursue high wage service jobs. With regard to the taxes, I don't know if there's going to be property tax well, who knows anything, right? But it depends at the local level. Really, it really comes into local politics. If you see people raising your property taxes, right? Like, I live in a pretty heavily Republican town. If they try to raise property taxes for anything other than preserving the school systems, you're gonna go find a new mayor. But if you sell it on the schools, I think it'll be okay. Its impact on inflation, it won't be that big because it will be at the local level, right? Unless the whole state just decides to do it in itself. Okay? I know it's not a very comprehensive or good answer, but I don't know. I do think it will be isolated because of the local issue, because of local politics.
Thank you. Thank you. And just
Pleasure meeting you.
One last question on just kind of going back to the automation. Do you see it, automation or you know, AI technology, all this big data? And we have in finance, and our data analytics is actually kind of scary how well it is. Do you see those kind of technologies displacing some of the higher income work, some of the higher income jobs?
And thank you, Charlie. Dr. Rafferty, before you answer, I just want to let you know Bill and Jonathan have their hands raised, and I have to step away for a moment. So if you can drive the next question.
Okay. It could. It's statistical principles, right? I mean, once you learn confidence intervals, linear regression, hypothesis testing, ANOVA stuff, you can apply it to a range of different things, which means it could find its way into the high wage service economy. I think we need to do two things, I guess. Have an explicit focus that we're not displacing labor at too fast of a rate, right? Because if it starts getting into the high income stuff, you know, we already have social unrest. What do you think, you know? So we need to be careful about that. And the second thing slipped my mind. Oh, sort of just, I'm kind of an optimistic person by nature, I guess. I think humanity will always sort of find a way to prevent the machines from being in charge. Okay? At least I hope so. Okay? You can get there if, you know, we do enough statistical analysis and, you know, somebody misses something and suddenly the machines are in charge, right? But that's usually, you know, the sci-fi stuff rather than what I think humans would try to do.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Yeah. She said, Bill, I think?
Yes, yeah. One of Biden's major economic proposals, besides his $2 trillion for climate change, was $700 billion to basically promote manufacturing in America. I know you just expressed skepticism about that, and I share your skepticism. Although if it's geared to essential items, you know, like PPE or medications, and perhaps it would work. Do you think there's a chance that it could be viable? I think it would require considerable subsidies for manufacturing here in the U.S.
Right. Yeah. So I guess the first thing is that I don't think it was any coincidence that he announced that in, was it Ardmore, Pennsylvania? Or, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Right? It, you know, one of the hardest hit manufacturing counties, or towns, areas in the country, right? So if he actually goes through with it is the first thing, right? He needs those voters to get elected. What is he going to do afterwards? We'll see. Okay. I'm optimistic. I'm hopeful that he does. I think that you are absolutely correct that it would require some sort of subsidy. And I'm all for building up manufacturing. I know that's going to contradict what I just said, okay? But I'm for manufacturing if it's PPE, you know, the essential stuff that this country needs, because we were bidding on it from China and Germany, right? We need to get that stuff here. And I would be perfectly fine with it if it was tied to greening our economy. If it was if it's manufacturing solar panels and batteries and the machines that are needed to get a green infrastructure, so be it. Great, that's wonderful. That's American jobs combating Americans' issues with climate change. Why not? Right? That in and of itself will also generate linkages, forward and backward linkages, with high wage service jobs. And Dean Natus said Jonathan. So is it Jonathan Rodriguez?
Yes.
Okay. Hey.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rafferty, for the presentation and just giving us a space to talk about this important topic that's crucial in our daily life right now. So in your presentation, you didn't mention like the social unrest aspects, such as like with the riots that's been going on, the peaceful protests, which does also have an impact to like our economy, and also like with the riots, like that also caused like looting and X, Y, and Z. It just exacerbated the tension. And so I did want to mention too that you did also talk about slightly on the Keynesian theory and Keynesian economics, which does focus on like it's based on a circular flow of money. And I know that within the last two videos that you mentioned before we opened into the Q&A, we had some words that were shared from the representatives from the U.S. Treasury that were talking about, you know, the printing of money, pumping money into the economy to give it to the nation so that they can like help pay, like give them a paycheck so they can spend it on food, etc. And so my question would be in regards to the Keynesian economics, which does state, for those that aren't familiar with it, it's on total spending in the economy, and its effects are on an output and inflation. And so Keynesian, he also advocated for an increase in government expenditures and lower taxes to stimulate demand and pull the global economy out of the depression. And so how do you think that the Keynesian economics theory can help heal the wounds from COVID and also like the civil unrest that really has the nation in a spiral?
Okay. So I stayed away from the social unrest because I'm not in the sociology department. So I'm really not qualified to speak on that. You know, I've seen what's on the news and, you know, I've read things, but I wouldn't be comfortable in a recorded public setting discussing social unrest. As far as what does Keynes's theory have for this economy, I think, so there's different theories of the economy, right? Some people think the economy functions according to neoclassicism. Some think it functions according to classical economics, like Ricardo or Sraffian economics. I believe the economy functions, the good theory is found in Keynes. I think 1936 General Theory of Employment, Interest, and Money accurately reflects how an economy works. And then there have been descendants of him that have written about it too, right? And so I adhere to some of them. I think, yes, that if I mean, look, right, here's the long and the short of it. And I know it's going to sound like I'm a card-carrying commie, but I'm not, okay? I'm not. But right now, what do you have? You have consumption that I suspect is going to consistently go down. The uncertainty is going to make investment go down. And we have a trade deficit. So that's already been a leakage in our circular flow, right? Well, where is stabilization going to come from? It can only come from one place. There's only four aggregate sources, four sources that make up aggregate demand. And that's consumption, investment, foreign trade, and government, right? That's the GDP equation. So the government needs to step in, and what we need to get right is how the government steps in. Are we going to give loans to United? I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I'm not getting on an airplane for like 2 years minimum. Okay. So I didn't like flying before it. So we need to make sure that it benefits. Again, I'll go back to something I said earlier. I think it was to Professor Butkus, that we need to make sure that the sources of value are accurately rewarded for their productivity while promoting ways to fight the climate crisis. Now, we can do that with government spending. We can do that. Or we can spend it on a wall, right? Which direction we want to go in is a matter of November, right? But yes, I do think Keynes's economics has very much to offer. That is why, I mean, I'll go on record. I'll say, when I teach in my classes, you know this, Jonathan, I teach many different schools of thought, but myself, I personally am a post-Keynesian. That's the one I adhere to, so.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Hey, Devin. This is Professor Sukram again, and I just wanted to talk about Charlie's point about incorporating artificial intelligence and how that will lead to possible, jobs being removed. And for those who don't know, I'm an assistant professor here at St. Peter's in the Department of Accountancy and Business Law. So I'm an accounting professor. So one thing I just wanted to mention was in the accounting field, it's prevalent that AI is infiltrating the field. And, the usage of it, I know there's a lot of people out there that are worried that it's going to take jobs away, but I try to let people know this. The reality is what's going away is, what's going to be going away is that manual data entry, repetitive process. As an accountant, you don't want to spend a lot of time doing that. Our role as a licensed CPA is to be the trusted business advisor. So what's going to go away is the less time entering data, cleaning the data, making sure it's accurate, and we can spend our valuable time being that trusted business advisor and guiding our clients in how to operate their business. So while there will be less jobs with the data entry point, it will allow our industry and accountants to really shine at what they're trained to do, which is less data entry, but more using your skills to advise businesses. So, I can only talk about, the accounting field, but the way I see it going forward is that, like I said, the mundane practices that have bogged down a lot of accountants and spending a lot of their time doing the repetitive manual entries, that's what's going to be replaced, and AI is going to take over. But you still need a human to make decisions, and you still need human interaction to guide your clients. So I don't foresee the human element being erased, but it allows us to utilize what we've went to school, what we learned to do, getting that CPA license. It allows us to shine and use our skill set for our true talent. So that's where I see AI affecting our particular industry.
I agree. The only thing I would add on to that, I guess, that's the point that I was kind of trying to make, how I believe it was with Bill, how, the loss of manufacturing jobs go away, right? But we can still then bootstrap ourselves up, to a higher wage service economy.
Upskill and reskilling.
Yeah. Anyone else? Oh, Dean Natus is back. Okay.
I'm back. I think that was an amazing conversation. Thank you, everybody, for your really great questions. Dr. Rafferty, you really covered so much in this very short amount of time. Maybe we'll have to set up a part 2 a couple months from now, maybe after November.
Hey.
Mid-November follow-up conversation.
Yeah, sure.
And I'm very grateful to everybody who joined us today. Thank you so much for your participation. We'll be sending out information on upcoming and new added events to our series. And I hope everybody continues to participate. So thank you. Thanks again to Dr. Rafferty for today's really dynamic and thought-provoking presentation. I love that you use the whiteboard, ready to teach at any time. And we truly are lucky to have professors like you and like all of our professors on the call. So thank you again to everybody.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks, you too.